Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to my new channel. If you want something in particular, comment below, and I will oblige. Thanks again. BMW Z8 Buyers Guide. Engine. Its best points were its smoothness and drivability. You could tell it was a V8, but it was never in your face with that. A sport button on the panel ahead of the gear stick quickened up the throttle response, but you didn't need it really. Timing was by chain rather than belt, but, as in the M5, the Z8 engine could suffer from generic issues like dying Vanos solenoids and cam sensors, oil leaks from the valve covers, and problems with the timing chain guides at higher mileages. Fortunately, not something that many Z8s are lumbered with. Even Z8s couldn't escape the march of time, though. They're over 20 years old now, and some of the plastic parts in the cooling system can become brittle. Two small coolant hoses are known for failing, and they are difficult to access. Fuel pumps start to die once the 50k mile mark has been passed, and would certainly be conk-out suspects at 100,000 miles. Pushing the start button and hearing a single click is the normal warning sign for that. Starting problems have in some cases been traced back to starter motor solenoids, but most of the difficulties in this area would be down to battery condition. The official BMW trickle charger wasn't up to the job of coping with the normal system drain. AGM, absorbent glass mat, batteries are now recommended by Z8 owners clubs. The gear stick gave you a reliable connection with the Getrag gearbox and had a shorter throw than the M5, but the action was still pretty deliberate and not quick. Clutch action was light. At the end of the day, you're looking at a very drivable and very usable manual V8. How many of those can you think of? The cool thing about a Z8, of course, is that any BMW dealer or specialist will be able to look after it. Just put BMW Z8 servicing into your browser and see how many normal garages are offering it. Whether you'd offer your Z8 to some of them is another matter, of course. Chassis. BMW made strenuous efforts to keep the Z8's weight down by using aluminium wherever possible in the chassis. Most notably in the space frame itself, which was made of extrusion-pressed beams, 1,000 or so rivets, and about 60 meters of MIG weld seams attaching it to the body panels. The suspension was 5-link at the rear with McPherson struts and lower wishbones at the front. BMW's DSC stability control system was included, and for the first time on a V8 BMW the Z8 had rack and pinion steering instead of recirculating ball, but journalists on the launch tests were not big fans of it. The 334mm, 328mm braking system was pinched from the 750i and therefore easily capable of arresting the Z8 without drama. But the absence of the M5's limited slip diff didn't sharpen up the handling, which was characterized by jagged transitions between grip and slip and dogged understeer through slower corners. The MotoGP organization used it as a safety car, but only for 1 year. Despite its 50-50 weight distribution, achieved by locating the engine well back in the bay, and classic BMW rear-wheel drive, the Z8 felt more like a big saloon than a two-seat sports car. Really, it was a Grand Tourer, a fact tacitly acknowledged by the production of the Alpina variant. You had to accept the car's limitations and drive it accordingly, feeling the noise rather than the nuances. There was a bit of an issue with the spaceframe chassis which might be of interest to anyone thinking of driving one hard on British roads, which was that the front suspension mounts were known to distort if a bad pothole was hit. The hard-riding run-flat tires didn't help, but BMW released a strut tower brace kit in 2006 to stabilize that part of the frame. Front suspension looseness accompanied by a rumble through the steering column and a steering shimmy was experienced by some owners. In some instances, BMW replaced several parts: steering column, brake pads and discs, ball joints, wheel bearings, anti-roll bars, engine mounts, in a piecemeal and somewhat random fashion in an effort to hit the target. Replacing the factory fluid-filled suspension bushings on the inner and outer control arms and the front strut rods with poly bushings worked for some, although they did alter the driving characteristics of the car. Others found replacing flat-spotted tires to be the answer. Bodywork. Some consider the Z8 to be the best-looking modern BMW. It might be less controversial to say that the Z8's aluminium body with plastic bumpers looks better now than it did back in period. That would be the crisp angle, delayed detonation effect coming into play once more. The upright screens front and rear and the flattened front grills incorporating chrome bezeled high beam lights, not driving lights, were more 507 than modern corporate. Chrome featured heavily on the car, including on the door mirrors whose glass could delaminate. This use of chrome was another bold retro touch, but it didn't sit that easily with the standard matte grey alloy 5-spoke wheels. Many American owners switched to different alloys to create a stronger contrast. There were 5 body paint choices, 3 of them being black, grey and silver. Titanium silver accounted for well over half of the total production run at around 3,200 cars. 1,570 of the remainder were in black. 319 topaz blue cars were made, 291 in bright red and 192 in straightest grey. Used examples in either of these primary colors hardly ever come up for sale. This is a massive shame because silver and grey don't do the car's interesting lines that many favors. Some 124 cars went through the BMW individual customization program. 19 had a two-tone finish, 11 were cream on straightest grey, 7 were silver on black, and 1 was carbon black over silver. As you would expect, these individual Z8s are extremely uncommon on the used market. The hood was electrically operated and had a tonneau cover if you wanted a neater look when it was down. The plastic tabs on this tonneau cover could break, and annoyingly BMW did not sell them as separate items. You had to buy a whole new tonneau at a cost of over £1,500. The rear window could cloud up and come adrift from the fabric. The roof mechanism could get out of adjustment, resulting in inaccurate docking. Often it would be down to the failure of the clip for the safety string that pulled the roof fabric out of the way on fold down. When it failed, it allowed the scissor mechanism to cut the hood fabric. This was the subject of a recall. Later cars had a redesigned hood that fixed the issue, so there should be no affected cars still around. If the roof didn't move when you asked it to, the issue could often be solved by lowering and raising the windows, or if you were really lucky, by turning the whole car off and on again. Sometimes, however, it would be a busted micro switch. There was a manual override to help you out if you could find the relevant section in the owner's manual. A color-matched 27 kg factory hardtop was provided with the car, but using one of those to cut out any of the V8 raw seemed like a peculiar choice for this kind of high days and holidays car. The Z8 was at its best with the hood down, but as mentioned earlier, the windrush at speed wasn't that comfortable for the occupants. The wind deflector did improve matters but wasn't a total solution. The xenon headlamp lenses became fogged over time by a film on the inside of the lenses. Interestingly, it seemed that this was only an issue on US cars. It has therefore been put down by some to the sealed units springing a leak during air transport, which is how they were delivered to the States. The bolts holding the boot lid could become loose, in the worst case scenario allowing the leading edge of the lid to chip the paint off the spacer section between the boot lid and the roof. Gas boot struts failed. The fast-acting neon indicator and tail lights were supposed to last for the lifetime of the car but didn't. They are expensive to replace and hard to find. When the Z8 came out, BMW committed to maintaining a 50-year parts supply for it, but there's been some grumbling in the Z8 community about the reality of this promise. These are not the only Z8 specific factory parts that can hit your pocket hard. Interior. Having splashed expensive, French-stitched, leather all over the Z8's cabin, not just the lower dash top, steering wheel and seats, but also the rollover hoops, it was odd that BMW chose body-colored plastic for the main dash section. The cabin's most visible piece of real estate. Admittedly, it provided a good visual impact in primary colored cars, but the idea definitely worked better there than it did on silver cars. The leather on top of the dash was prone to coming unglued around the screen heating vents. Fixing this dashboard delamination was a pricey job at over £2,000 including labor. Clips holding the seat back leather in place failed on several cars, and the rearview mirror was subject to discoloration. There were probably more buttons on the free Motorola StarTAC flip phone, famously hated by owner Steve Jobs, than there were in the rest of the Z8 interior, where functions were combined into as small a number of simple, Z8 unique controls as possible. Windows and mirrors were adjusted by a single metal button on the driver's door. The wheel was electrically adjustable for rake but not tilt. The radio incorporated a very early sat-nav system that took many minutes to program. Boosting the Z8's credentials as a Grand Tourer was its luxuriously carpeted boot. Even with the battery sited under the floor to help with the weight distribution, there was good cargo space in there, supplemented by neat locking cubbies behind the seats. There was a locking glove box too, but these were famous for refusing to open, as was the cover for the phone hatch, which was controlled by the same circuit. Door storage compartment lids didn't always close either, and seat heaters sometimes failed to heat. Aircon drainage tubes clogged up, causing dampness in the footwells. The ignition key looked like any other BMW ignition key other than having a Z8 plate rather crudely screwed to the back of it. To cover its and their embarrassment, BMW supplied a zip-up leather pouch for it. You needed to use that if you had a key ring because there was no ring provision on the key itself. When the key battery died, you couldn't open the housing to replace it. You had to buy a new key at some expense, which then had to be linked to the car.